vote for this kind of stuff. You know, another program that, that cash for clunkers program, and that wasn't a huge program as far as money goes. It was only about $4 billion. You know, that's not a lot of money, but it cost about $24,000 per car that they got and squashed and destroyed. And how's the used car market going these days? These used cars are kind of high because they destroyed a lot of those cars. I mean, is that a free market kind of a program that the government should be involved in? Where is that program in the U.S. Constitution? I just don't get it. And that's why I keep talking about that cash for clunkers program. This is not free market capitalism that I support. I've been a businessman all my life. I've got a farm over in Texas County. I run cattle. I ran a dairy farm for a number of years. I'm also a realtor. I'm just a businessman. I've never got a check from the government. I mean, I've always got to figure out how to work and make it work out there on my farm. And let me tell you something. It's been tough to do. And I understand how people are sick and tired of big government regulating everything they do, trying to make a living. And that's why I'm running. I want to go to Washington, D.C. and put some common sense back there in Washington and represent the folks. You guys aren't being represented up there. History lesson. Let's go back a few years to about 98, 99. They had this bill called the Glass-Steagall Act. And it passed. And it just barely passed. And our representative, Mrs. Emerson, was one of those votes that got it over the hump. It only passed by a vote or two. Repealing Glass-Steagall repealed all those protections that we put on the banks after the Great Depression to keep the banks from gambling with the deposits that you put in there. Well, that was repealed, and at the time that was repealed, there was debate on the floor of the House talking about how because that was repealed, in about 10 years, we would see a huge financial crisis because of those, letting the bankers run wild. And the derivative thing started and everything else. 10 years later, about 10 years later, we saw in 08, we saw a huge problem in our banking industry. There was another program, I think some of you remember, especially if you're a teacher, the No Child Left Behind program. Remember that under George Bush? It nearly doubled the size of the Department of Education. A massive increase in government intrusion into our schools. Mrs. Emerson voted for it. I didn't support that. It just blew my mind. There was like 70-some programs that new federal program. I think we need to get rid of the Federal Department of Education. How's that working for us? Just turn it back to the state of Missouri and our local school board. Another thing that I have an issue with as a businessman and a red-blooded American, raising the debt limit again and again and again. And it happened under George Bush. It's been happening for years. And last year, your representative voted to raise the debt limit again and funded all of the massive spending of the Obama budget. Again, you can look it up. It happened last August. And so, I'm tired, and I know a lot of you are tired, trying to figure out how this stuff is going to work for our country. To continue to do this kind of debt on our kids. They talk about our kids and our grandkids all the time, but look what they're doing to them. One thing that was mentioned was that union pension bailout. You can get on YouTube and pull up a video of Fox News talking about that union pension bailout. And they called it at the time a backstop. But it's really a bailout. It puts your signature as a guarantee on those private union pensions, and it included other companies too. It wasn't just unions. But they wanted to put your signature so you would stand good for if there was ever a loss in those union pension funds and other pension funds. Because there's going to be tremendous losses in the union pension funds with the way these union pensions are set up. They're so short already, there's going to be massive losses, and that's what they were trying to do, is to get you to be the one to hold the bag on that situation. You can pull that video up. It's a great video. And Joanne Emerson's picture, when you pull that up, it's right in the middle. She was one of just a handful of Republicans that supported her. And I pointed out the last election that she's married to a union. He was a union lobbyist. He quit shortly after I exposed it in 2009. He stopped being a union lobbyist. But I found that one day looking through the Missouri lobbyist list. He represented 12 unions here in Missouri. And that's documented. But he still works for the the unions, he's an attorney. So I think it's, I don't know that it's illegal, but I think you ought to know as a voter that you're supporting a representative that is supporting these kind of bailouts to go to the unions that directly benefit her husband and his position. So, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Kind of like Fox News. We report, you decide. If you want more, that to continue, keep voting that way. But I think it's important, and I think you should know it. Now, the DNC donation to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that's in the FEC reporting that there's a $250 donation in 2009 to Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yes. Yep.
I would not give a donation to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I promise you, if you decide to put me in Congress, you won't see any donations from Bob Parker to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It's not going to happen.
Yes, you did.
As far as the lobbyist's daughter, I wish Mrs. Emerson the best. I wish her family the best. But her daughters are both lobbyists. One of the lobbyists for GM, who Mrs. Emerson bailed out. And the other one is I don't know if they're currently, but it's a lobbyist for Monsanto, who Mrs. Emerson takes a lot of campaign money from. And I just, I report, you decide. As far as the NRA endorsement, nobody's more pro-gun than Bob Parker. The NRA endorses gun-friendly incumbents. That's their policy. They're a single-issue endorser. I support the NRA. I understood they would endorse Mrs. Emerson again this time, and that's okay. That's what they do. But I want you to understand I have an A rating with the NRA. I'm a gun guy. I love to hunt. But the Second Amendment isn't just so we can go hunting, is it? It's to defend our families and defend our freedom. That's what the Second Amendment is all about. Now, this NDAA situation that was mentioned, I just want to talk about that a little bit. Right at the end of last year, they had this National Defense Authorization Act where they fund our troops. And an amendment was put on there, a provision was put in there, that they could indefinitely detain Americans on American soil without trial. And Barack Obama threatened to veto it. It went ahead and passed. When he signed the bill on New Year's Eve, he said, and you can look, don't just believe what I'm saying, look it up. He said, I know it says I can indefinitely detain Americans, but I'm not going to do it. You can trust me. We all trust Barack, right? So that went through to the outrage of millions of Americans, but the media did not cover it at all. I don't know how many of you are aware of the NDAA bill and what it did. But many people were outraged. Now, they had an amendment last week. Now, also last week, I'll just throw this in, a federal judge ruled that bill, that NDAA bill, and those provisions were unconstitutional. And last week, we had a provision, an amendment that would repeal those provisions, those indefinite detainment provisions in that bill. It failed. And Mrs. Emerson, voted to not support that amendment, so it failed. So that provision is still in the NDAA bill, which I think is an outrage. As a matter of fact, this morning, a big radio station down in West Plains, who I was on a couple of weeks ago, we did an hour show, and we talked about the NDAA bill a little bit. And Mike Evans said, well, hey, I'm going to get Joanne Emerson on next week, if I can, because I'd really love to have her on my show. And I said, well, I don't think you'll ever get her on. He said, oh, no, I think I'll get her on. Well, right before the show that morning, she called or something, and anyway, she canceled. She wasn't on the show. Well, this week, with all this stuff happening on the NDAA bill, this morning on his show, and it's a big show. It covers about 5 counties, so 107.1 in West Plains. Mike Evans was going off on Mrs. Emerson voting the way she did on that NDAA amendment, and not letting that be put in there so we could strip those provisions of the NDAA. So those are some of the things that are happening. I would love to have a debate. I've asked for a debate 3 years ago. I've asked for a debate during this election. We don't have a debate. I think you would benefit greatly by a debate, where we could talk about these things and hear the views of both of the candidates for this office. But I think that's what makes our country great, is that ability, that freedom of speech that we have, so we can debate and air those kind of differences so that you can decide. It's not about It's not about the candidates, it's about you. We're losing our country, folks. We're losing our country because of these professional politicians that just don't seem to think the U.S. Constitution applies to them anymore. And they are voting every day to destroy your rights and your freedoms. And they are destroying your economic freedom. You're going to see what the result of this massive spending and borrowing is going to be pretty soon. And it's not going to be pretty. And we're either going to replace these professionals with people that are ready to quit their jobs, leave their farms, and go to Washington and try to straighten this mess out, or leave them in there to continue this mess. I'm Bob Parker. I'm running for Congress. I ask sincerely for your support today. Thank you.